Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. So in this video tutorial guys, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to continue to finish up unit 2 from where we stopped last time, and we have just a couple more things on unit 2, and then we will be entering unit 3 where we talk about logic circuits and gates, and we'll be doing a lot of practical work on that. So last time, if you guys remember, we looked at the different type of data error checking methods, that is error checking methods, and how to check data has properly arrived at as its destination. And we stopped at echo check, which we completed to talk about. That was the last error checking method that we have for this unit. And now we're going to be looking at internet technologies. So internet technologies, as you guys already know, the internet basically is used to connect different computer systems around the world for the purpose of communicating with each other as long as they adhere to protocols. And protocols are basically a set of rules that are in place on the World Wide Web so that each computer can safely communicate with themselves back and forth. Now we're going to be looking at internet service providers, and these are companies that basically provide internet service to you as a user. And for example, in Mexico, they have Telcel. They're different type of internet service providers. So they all are companies that provide users with access to the internet. You have to pay a monthly fee. Sometimes they would normally set up not even sometimes, they would normally set up an account for you where they would ask you to enter username and password. And of course, sometimes they might also even give you or create for you an email address. So before internet service providers, these companies came into place, that is before they came in 1990s, internet access was usually for those who worked in a university or were part of a government agency. Now, if we look at internet protocol, that is what we call the IP address. I'm sure you guys have heard about this term a lot of times. Internet protocol is just a unique address that basically uniquely identifies the location of a device connected on the internet, so the location of a computer system. Do not confuse IP address with MAC address. If you guys recall from Unit 1, when we're looking at the binary and hexadecimal systems, we did see that one of the use of the hexadecimal system was because it was used when assigning MAC addresses to devices which usually come from the company. So MAC addresses are basically addresses which are used to uniquely identify a device itself. So it's like you're saying, if you're living in a house, your MAC address is basically your postal address that uniquely is basically the address that uniquely identifies who's living in the house, how many people and who they are. And of course, the internet or the IP address would be basically your normal postal address or your address that locates your home. So that's just like a kind of realistic explanation of the difference between the two of them. So internet protocol address is usually a unique address that provides the location of a computer system or device that is connected on the internet. It is usually a 32-bit number, which usually is written in this kind of a form. So usually it starts with the country code and then the city code and so on. So it really depends on the country itself. And so based on that, you'll be able to identify where the computer is located. So it's always with regards to the location of where the computer is. So there are different internet or IP addresses. A home computer is usually given an IP address when it connects to the internet. So like I said, it basically locates that device connected to the internet. And this is usually assigned by the internet service provider. So there is a relationship between the internet service providers and the internet or the IP address. So the internet service providers are the companies that basically allocate the internet or IP address. And it's usually unique for every internet session. So that means anytime you open an internet session or you're trying to make a connection or open a website, your IP addresses changes. So once you open it today, and then you open it another time, the IP address may differ. So it's unique for the particular internet session that you're opening. The only IP address that remains fairly unchanged are web servers, because web servers act or do the job of connecting or allowing a safe connection between the user that is trying to access a particular website and the website itself. So the web servers are the ones that normally contain the URL addresses of the website that the user computer is trying to access. It also says sometimes the IP address can be used instead of typing a full URL. So this is normally for people who are kind of familiar with how you can use an IP address to open a website or a web page without putting the URL. So you normally put this HTTP protocol, hypertext transfer protocol, which we're going to see what it means. You have to put this first, and then of course the two dots, the colon, and then the two black slashes, and then or you could say front slashes rather, and then the IP address of that particular website or web page if you know what it is that you're trying to open, and it will still open the same website or web page. So it takes you straight to the device that is corresponding to this address. So this is another way of how you can open a specific device on the other side when you're trying to access it instead of typing the full URL. So here is a difference between the IP address and the MAC address. So like I said, the MAC address, which is also called the Media Access Control address, we've already seen this from chapter 1. If you go back to the video tutorials we did on chapter 1. And this address is usually uniquely used to identify devices that are connected to the internet. So like I said, if you were supposed to identify the difference between an IP address and a MAC address, the IP address, like I said, will give you the location of the device, and the MAC address is the one that uniquely identifies the device connected to the internet. So, for example, like I gave you again, if you think of an IP address as the address of a house you live in, that is, again, like your post or zip code, it will have, some unique way of identifying where you live, the area you live in. And the MAC address would basically be identifying uniquely who lives in a house. So that's pretty much how you differentiate between the two of them in a realistic sense. It is also possible to move house. So if you move house, that means like when you open a new internet session every time, your IP address changes, which is something similar to a realistic example of when you move your house, every time your IP address also changes, but the people still remain the same. So that means the MAC address is usually fixed, except you change it for some sort of reason because you're trying to access a particular website or session, or you're working in a company that use specific MAC address formats. That's the only time you change the MAC address from the manufacturing company. Most of the time, the MAC address is already issued by the manufacturing company where you buy your computer or device, and it remains the same. So the IP address is the one that tends to change. All right, guys, we're moving to hypertext markup language, HTML. And you guys know most of the time, I'm sure most of you know that HTML is the most popular language used to create websites. And so some things you might not have known is that HTML is actually divided into two subcategories, which we call structure and presentation. So we're going to be seeing that in a few minutes. For now, let us understand what HTML itself is. So HTML is not a programming language, so we should first remove this kind of dilemma. So it is not a programming language, rather it is considered as a markup language, which has to deal. So what is a markup language? A markup language is a language that deals with how text and information is processed and displayed. So it has to deal with the creation and format of text and information, but at the same time the presentation of how that text and information is presented. So HTML is used when writing and developing web pages. And like I said, it is not a programming language, but it is a markup language. And a markup language is used in processing and defining and presentation of text, especially in terms of color of text, and even sometimes even the way if you want to include stuff like sound or video, that all has to do with the presentation part of the text, which is all under HTML. Now, HTML normally uses tags, especially when creating or formatting a particular information on a web page or website. So it uses tags, which basically are used to bracket a piece of code. So it depends on what you're trying to create. For example, the TD tags is used to create tables. And we have the TD, whenever you start with a tag, you open a tag, you must close a tag with this backslash. So that's how it works in HTML. And so whatever is between the two tags would be defined. So for example, if you're trying to create a table, but this is table title mostly, like table, you could say columns, if I'm not mistaken. So you could say like the columns, which is like when you want to create a table, you obviously are going to have columns. And these columns are going to be what you're going to be putting inside later on under them. So you're going to have other information. For example, if you see what I mean here, so the TR first creates the table, and then the TD kind of creates the rows or the columns for where you're going to be putting in your title information in the table. So as you can see, what they said was whatever is between the tags will be defined. So this is what's between them. This is a small car, and you can see we have the H3, which is the heading tag, and it must all close. you realize that the TD is not closing because you haven't finished inserting all of your title information. It closes here at the end. But the H3 tag would close because that is the heading tag you were applying for this title called small car. And H3 is like one of the medium, not so big, not so small kind of tag if you want to include a title. We have H1 to H6 in HTML. And then we have this other one, which is used car sales. And then we have another one, which is an H2 tag. And you notice that they all close at the end. And then we have BR, which is a break line, which comes to a new line. And then we have another title there, which is cash sales only, which is using a formatted in an H2 heading tag, and you see it closes all at the end. The H2 tag closes, then the TD tag that was open initially closes, and then the break tag. And then finally the rows, the table that was created itself. And then this part here, so you could say this section here, guys, has to do with the structure of the website you're creating. So this is the structure, which means this is how you are formatting it to look as a skeleton of how it should be looking like. And then when you come down here and you look this, you could see this kind of has to do more with the presentation. As you can see that this table, you're inserting a border with a thickness of 1. And then you have a column group and a column span of gap 2, maybe 2 space gaps, and then the style, which is the background color, and the background color is set to a red, and the background color for the span, for the spacing is set to a red, and the style itself is set to yellow. And then you close this tag. So this, you could say, has to do with all of the presentation, what you are creating in the table would look like. So this is the structure, and then this is the presentation or the design of that structure. So this brings us to HTML being subdivided into 2 categories, which I said earlier on, and they are the structure and the presentation. So whenever you are writing HTML code, it is very important to realize that there is a difference between structure and presentation. So what is structure? Structure is the essential part of the HTML document, and it includes the semantics. Semantics is just like the tags, the text, the way you write code, should I say, not even code, but the way you write the language itself to be able to create that particular structure of a web page or a website. So this is what we call the semantics. So it is the essential part. You must have a structure, of course, before you design anything, because you design on your skeletal structure. You don't design when you don't have a structure, or you don't set anything or format anything. So it is it is an essential part of the HTML document, whether website, web page, etc. And it includes the semantics and structural markup of the document. So which means all where you put the tags in the formats for whether you want to have a table or whether you want to have a division or alignment or etc., or tabs, etc. Presentation is the style of the document. So like I said, this is where you deal with, styling the document, styling the web page, of how it will look like. And you could also have to do with the sounds. What are you going to be including as a sound on the web page, or video as well? So all the presentation has to do with the coloring, has to do with how you want stuff to look like, the font size, the font style, and the sound or video if you're going to insert multimedia features. So these 2 features must be kept separate throughout the designing of a web page. And so that brings us to where we have to create an HTML file, which is going to be the file that will contain the structure of the web page or HTML document, and a CSS file, which is what we call Cascading styling sheets. And that's going to be the file that will contain the presentation or the design of that text. So this is why they said they must be kept separate. So at the end of the design process, the author should have an HTML document which contains the structure and the actual content. So like I said, a separate CSS file sheet, which we call Cascading Style Sheet. And this file will contain everything that will be used to control the presentation of the web page. So a CSS file will basically contain information of how you are, presenting and displaying the structure of your web page or website, which would deal with the coloring, the spacing, the lighting, the borders, all of that. So some of the tags used to create the CSS files have already been shown in the HTML example above, which is this one that we saw here. Like, for example, here where you see that there's a column span of 2 and then there's a background style. So this is an example of where we insert this kind of tag in CSS that has to do with the presentation and the design of the HTML document or web page itself. So the following section shows an example of how these tags can be used to create the style sheet. And this example is called example2.css. This is then used in a web page document. So the tags h1, h3, and p all define how the document is going to look like when the CSS file is attached, style sheet is attached. So here, guys, as you can see in this example figure 2.16, you see that this is a typical example of how a CSS file would look like. And so it is formatting anything that is a header. For example, anything that has or is defined under the H1 heading will have this specific color using this color code, would be in this specific type of font style, would be aligned in the center, and would have a font size of 32 pixels. So for example, if we use, we put a heading of, say, hello, for example, and hello is going to be in the structure. And inside of the structure, so we don't necessarily have to have a table. Let's say we do like P. So what I'm trying to say is, let's say we have something like this. This is a paragraph tag. And inside of the paragraph tag, we have between the tag, of course, that opens and the tag that closes, we have a text that we want to, oh, sorry, I need to make this an arrow. We have a text that we want to say hello. Now, if this is what we call the structural part of the HTML, so this is what we call the structure. But if you want to do the presentation, which is the part where we have the CSS, and you want to apply a design for this title, maybe we want to make this title bigger. So we know in HTML, we normally have tags from H1 to all the way to H6. Okay, so these are basically where the tags start from. H1 all the way to H6. Please mind my capital H. It doesn't matter if it's capital or small. Normally it's supposed to be small, so I'll just write that here. So it starts from H1 all the way to H6. So which means if I wanted to, so H1 would be the largest size you could have as a heading title, and then H6 would be the smallest. So let's say I wanted to apply H1 heading title to this heading format, to this title hello. Well, I'm going to have to open my tag. So this is going to come on a paragraph. So I'm going to open my tag H1, and then I'm going to have to close my tag here. Now, if we apply the CSS file, that means the CSS part of this, because for HTML is divided into the structure and into the presentation. And so the structure is the one that is going to be containing the .html file, right? The one that you create, which would have all of these tags and formats. So let's put it here. So this is the .html. And then the presentation is the one that will contain the CSS. This is where the CSS file will be, .css, basically, whatever file name .css. Now, if we apply what we have here, as you can see, H1, if we have this exact same code stored in the CSS, so which is the H1, and then we have all of that information of the design, I'm just going to put blank lines, and it's stored in the CSS, it means when we run this website, you're going to see that this hello title that I have created here with the H1 tag, which was created in the CSS for specific design and presentation with color and font size and font style, it will apply to it. So the hello will basically be in this particular font color, which is hash 444000. So it will be in that font color. It will have this font style of Arial and sans serif, and it will also be in the center, and it will have a font size of 32 pixels. So these two work hand in hand, basically. The structure works hand in hand with the presentation, but you must have the structure first before you can apply a presentation. So that's something important to remember. So this shows how the CSS file example2.ss is created for the use of in a document, like I said again, H1, H3, or P, which have all been defined. So these are all heading tags, and this is a paragraph tag. So when the file is attached below, a web browser knows how to display the web page. So the web browser, guys, what it does is like it translates the HTML code into a format that you see as a user, that is into a user-friendly format where you can see the home page and you just see the images, basically the graphical user interface of that web page. So the web browser is the one that does the job to interpret the web page into a format that the user can see as a text and icons and all of that. For example, if I'd open a web page, this is just in my web page, and I say this is just normal Google, as in just a normal Google opened web page. Now, if I go to right click and I view page source, you see that this is the page source of this web page I just opened for Google. And you can see that there's the HTML code, and then there's the styling part, which is basically the CSS section right here of how the web page is designed. It starts with the closing tag, the opening tag, all the way to the end. So this exactly represents this. This is what you see when you open a web page, but this is really what happens behind. So the web browser is the one doing the job to translate all of this code that is behind the scene, which we call the back end, into what you see at the front end here. Okay, guys, so moving on, now we're going to be looking at the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which we all know as the HTTP. And if you guys can see, it already shows me here where it says connection is secure. And if I double click on this, I can see the HTTPS for me, which this extra S means that my connection with this website or this Google Classroom is secured. That is, the data that I'm trying to receive and transfer in Google Classroom is encrypted. So Hypertext Transfer Protocol, the technical definition for this in computer science is that it is a set of rules that must be obeyed when transferring files across the internet. So basically, when I try to access a website or a web page, what really happens is that request goes to the web server. And so the web server looks for the URL address of that particular website or web page I'm trying to access to try to find it. And once it does, it then requests that access from the website or web page server. And then that sends it back, sends back a kind of security certificate, which is called the SSL. But we also have another one called a TSL, which is more secure. But the SSL is the general one that we have most of the time. So this is like what you guys can see. If you click on this padlock on your browser, you would see certificate is valid. So a certificate from what your computer is trying to request to open as a website needs to be sent back to your computer so it can be confirmed that the connection established is secure. So this certificate is a way of identifying a secure connection or secure end so that the data that is being inserted on that session, that means the session where you open the website or web page, is secure, it's encrypted, and nobody can, hack through. So you have to be very careful. Sometimes if you see this notification saying connection is insecure, then you are definitely not recommended to enter any information or email or password of any of that sorts in that particular website. So the SSL certificate is normally the certificate that is sent on both ends from the session that is trying to be accessed, the final destination, which is the website that you're trying to open, and your computer as well, your own session. So it's like a back and forth, a vice versa process where mostly SSL certificates from the receiving end, the requested end, will have to send it back to the one that is requesting it, which is your computer, so the secure connection can start. So like I said, the letter S, the padlock usually signifies that it's secure. So you would often see this padlock like you guys can see on my browser, and the S that refers that the connection is secure. Normally, they say it is slower to open HTTPS, web pages or websites than HTTP because, of course, it has to ensure the secure connection, encrypted connection. So it does take a little bit of time. So when compared to opening something that is just an HTTP without the S. So it says HTTPS is usually only adopted when there is sensitive data or private data that needs to be transferred across the internet. So now this brings us towards the end, guys, which is the web browser. So like I already mentioned before, I said the web browser is a software which usually allows a user to display a web page on their computer screen. So like I just showed you with the backend of our normal Google site when you open, or just normal browser session. So this is the backend where it contains the code, that is the structure and the presentation all in one file, as you can see, and then this is the front end that the user itself can see here on their page. So what they're trying to tell you is that the web browser basically allows the user to display a web page on their screen. So with the web browser, you can be able to open any sort of web pages that you would like, and it will display it for you because the web browser does the job of interpreting this code, this HTML code, into a graphical user interface, basically. So like I said, the web browsers interpret or translate HTML code from websites and show the results of the translation. This can often be in the form of videos, images, or sound. Most web browsers share the following features. So web browsers all have a home page. They also have the ability to store the user's favorites, websites and web pages. They keep a history of the websites you visited. So if you guys can see my browser, this is keeping the history of the websites that I normally visit or I visited just recently. So this is kept. So this is one function of the web browser. They also give you the ability to go back and forward to websites open. So there is the back button here at the top and there's a front. Right now, I can't go to any one of them because I don't have any website that I've opened and closed and kind of want to go back. So it says users can either click on the web URL address, which is this one, and then you are able to be redirected, or they can just type in the URL manually. If you know what it is, you just type it here and you can be directed to wherever you need to go. And so the web browser will break down your URL address into 3 parts. So how it's able to access and open for you the particular web page is that it breaks the URL address into 3 parts. The first part, of course, is the protocol, which must be obeyed for both sessions to be established successfully. And so that's the HTTP or HTTPS. And then the next part is the website itself or the web server's name. So this is where it finds the URL. And then finally is the file that you're trying to open on that particular website or, that you're trying to access. So the web browser translates the web server's name into an IP address like we talked about before, which is also part of the URL. So the HTML code is returned and is shown as a correctly formatted page on the computer screen. So which is basically what you have here on your front end and what you get at the back end here. And then it is also possible that cookies may be sent from the web browser to the web server when the code is executed. So if needed, cookies will also be sent. And cookies are part of your browser extension, and they normally contain also frequently visited websites. So that's pretty much what help advertising companies to post adverts for you based on your recent or frequent searches. So if necessary, they would also be sent from the web browser to the web server when the code is executed. And this is where we come to the end of this video tutorial for Unit 2, guys. I hope it was helpful for you to understand the unit. If you do have any particular questions, please let me know in the comment section and I'll answer them for you. The next unit is actually one of my favorites for computer science. We're going to do it as a practical unit, so we'll have a lot of work to do. I'll show you some websites of where you can design logic gates and circuits, and that's pretty much what we're going to do. So this is how we understand how the internal components of a computer system or circuits work to be able to make the computer function, which is what you get. So this has to do with the internal composition of the computer system. So I hope this was helpful again, guys. I wish you a very great day, evening, or morning, and take care. I'll see you again very soon.